Hello and welcome to XVI's E3 Roundup. I am your usual host Mark, and this week I am joined by CEO and head programmer Ben,
Howdy.
and generous consultant and head of his own project, of course, Dylan.
Hey, yo.
So E3 is over. I think it's over. It normally ends up a week after it begins. Um, I'll be honest, it kind of came a little bit too quick for me, and it kind of left a little bit too quick for me. But we're going to do a good job of rounding things up, talking about the games that were announced that we're most looking forward to, who do we think had the best conference, and stuff like that. So let's start with the obvious. Which game announced are we most looking forward to? Who would like to start us off?
I really struggled with C3 actually. Normally E3's like a really big thing, and there's lots of big names and there's lots of these big releases, and to be honest, there wasn't really anything that kind of took my interest so much. Um, I was looking through back the games I actually thought, oh, I could play that, and I actually found Watch Dogs Legion was a game I thought, wow, actually that's I could play that. That looks good. It's not like the first couple of Watch Dogs. In this one, they've decided that you can play as any character as opposed to a main character.
Okay.
So it's almost like I thought the problem with Watch Dogs is it didn't really have an identity, and I actually feel it's kind of ironic now where it's making you can play any main character. And when I say any main character, you can play as a child, you can play as an old granny, and you'll still have the abilities like you can beat up a load of thugs and stuff like that.
I
So it's
saw the
almost
old granny one. That was quite
yeah.
funny.
So it's really interesting that it's almost taking it, because Watch Dogs is quite a serious franchise, and it's not something I've really been interested in because well, why play Watch Dogs when you can play GTA, right? And it's kind of taking this Saints Row feel where it's like, okay, we're not going to take ourselves so seriously now, and we're going to kind of open up and have it just as this kind of sandbox world.
I kind of have an unpopular opinion with Watch Dogs. Give me the choice of the three, and I would probably still choose the first one. I guess, like, Aiden was not a good character. I'll say that now. Aiden was not a good character. The entire story of his niece dying, his nephew going off the rails, his sister hates him, all things like that. It's so bland and cliched and done before. But what I liked about it was the hacking side of things. So just driving around Chicago, you see a traffic light, oh, I'm going to hack that, and you cause a little bit of anarchy. The second one, they kind of, like, when I first saw it announced, I just thought, have they lost their minds? Because suddenly it's, San Francisco, everyone's a hipster, the guy with the, like, LED screen for a face, and it just felt so, like they'd taken Watch Dogs and then just removed all realms of reality from it, and then that was Watch Dogs 2. So, Watch Dogs 3 actually looks like they've found a nice balance between the two. So I'm looking forward to it as well.
It's like I said, if they go to more towards like a sandbox, like the first prototype game was, where you could just go around and using your powers and that kind of thing, it'd be really cool, I think, because I've never played a Watch Dogs game. I haven't played number one and number two because they just didn't. The gameplay appealed to me, but it didn't. It wasn't enough to draw me in. So I really like this kind of novelty idea of it's Legion, it's anonymous, anyone can be the main character, and you can choose who the main character is, and that main character will have a backstory, and you'll see their backstory no matter who it is. So I think it's really, really interesting. And if your main character dies, that's it, they're gone from the game. You have to pick someone else. So it's a really novelty idea, and I think whether or not it reignites a fan base for Watch Dogs, I think it will end up being a good game. Obviously, we'll just have to see how the companies handle it.
Yeah, that last bit you said about characters dying and moving on, that reminds me a bit of We Happy Few. I remember when that was announced a couple of years ago. I really wish I'd bought that game, actually. I might still do that. That was a really interesting, groundbreaking kind of game.
To this day, I
So,
have no idea what that game is about.
neither do I. Like, I've watched the trailer for it, I've watched the demo for it, and I watched the early access for it, and I still couldn't 100% tell you with confidence what exactly is going on.
Well, from my perspective, all I've ever seen of it is thumbnails.
Ah, okay. Creepy masks, yeah.
Yeah, that Joker vibe.
How about you then, Dylan? What game was announced that you were excited for?
I don't know. I felt this E3 was just, it's almost to say it's a giant movie trailer fest. All I've seen is just trailers for video games. Like the only trailer that well, not the only one, but the one that would get me most interested is something like Elden Ring,
Okay.
because of the background of it, not purely because of the trailer showing. I see nothing in that besides some guy talking over it. I mean, even the Elder Scrolls did that, but it's like because it's collaboration by George R. R. Martin and From Software, who created the Soulsborne franchise and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's piqued my interest a bit. And one other game I would say, um, Darksiders Genesis, because I'm a fan of the franchise.
Yeah. I kind of agree with you guys. I mean, I think last year was too good, and it's made this year look bad. I think that's the problem because last year's E3 there were so many new announcements. I think there was more conferences than ever before. Microsoft, especially last year, they announced the most amount of games in any conference ever. I think they said this year they were going to do more, but it didn't feel like more. I think because a lot of it was like the montages videos at the beginning and the end. They had a couple of announcements in there as well. So the majority of it was pretty like it was good, but it wasn't as good as last year. And I think that's why we all sort of feel a bit downbeat because of it.
I definitely feel downbeat. I feel it's almost like what happened to YouTube Rewind just happened to E3, where it's almost like this was kind of for investors, not the consumers. I don't know. It didn't it really didn't speak to me. And as a gamer, I feel that this kind of thing. This should be the biggest thing of the year. This should be the biggest thing of the year for me, E3, and it was a couple of years back. But now it just nothing. I didn't feel anything, and I watched through a lot of the different presentations, and to be honest, not one of them was like, wow, this feels so good. I'm so glad I'm a gamer.
Yeah, well, it also doesn't help that Sony decided to dip this year and then proceeded to not show anything even afterwards.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
yeah. I think the other problem is there's so many leaks in the industry these days as well that half the stuff was announced like 3 or 4 weeks ago because they were so worried about it getting leaked before their conferences that they just released it anyway. So E3 is kind of it's a bit of a damp squib now because you still get some shocks and surprises, but the majority of it you already know before you even sit down to watch it. So yeah, I have some highlights, some games that I'm looking forward to. Watch Dogs 3, Watch Dogs Legion, that's definitely one of them. Halo Infinite looked pretty good, so I'm looking forward to that. The big standout for me was Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Um, Very much looked like The Force Unleashed, which is my favourite Star Wars video games. So it's good to see that it's good to see that EA are actually starting to get a grip on what people want in a Star Wars game, and not just make it an FPS shooter with loot boxes.
Well, see, I would have said like the Star Wars game for my most anticipated, but the problem is, I've been burned so many times, not just by like the Star Wars franchise, but by EA specifically. So I don't feel like I can trust that brand. I don't feel like I'm going to be delivered something I'm going to enjoy.
Yeah,
So
I'm personally
that's
not
just
gonna
how I
jump the
feel.
I'm personally not gonna jump the gun either on any of these.
I mean, if it releases and it's a great game, yes, I'll praise it to high heaven. But until that happens, I think I'm just gonna wait off and not hype it up in my head.
And to be honest, of all the new games that were announced this year, the thing that actually excited me the most was the Xbox Game Pass announcements and all the old games that have been included on that now. I don't think that's a good omen when games that have existed for a few years get me more excited than games that don't actually exist yet.
Yeah.
It's like it's a trusted mentality. You trust the old games because you know they were good, whereas it's a
Yeah,
gamble for new ones.
yeah, and things like so Borderlands 4 has been announced, and it looks awesome. It's the one game we all watched the conference at the same time. We all said we want to play that. So the fact that the Handsome Collection is now on the Game Pass means I can actually catch up because I've never played Borderlands. I know about it, but I've never played it, so I can actually catch up now and sort of get into the hype, ready for the new one. That's the only bit really where like it's the only game that's made me want to go back and play the old ones in order to get ready for the new one. The rest of them, even like Halo Infinite, looked good, but it just felt off. Like there was something that wasn't quite right about it. And I think like Chief was in the trailer, and he does talk, and you see him. I think Cortana was revealed at the end, but that random guy in that ship seemed to be the main focal point of the trailer, which suggests to me that he might be more of a main character in this game, which is worrying because for me Halo is Master Chief, and without Master Chief you might as well just call it something else because it's not Halo anymore. So yeah, we've talked a lot about Microsoft's conference. I'd say Microsoft probably was the standout one of the year still. We'll address the elephant in the room right now. Keanu Reeves for Cyberpunk 2077. Discuss.
So when we have celebrities in any kind of media, particularly it seems gaming, it's kind of a novelty in my eyes. So it's very similar to having Peter Dinklage in Destiny. Um, Even in TV shows, it's like having Ed Sheeran in Game of Thrones. It's kind of a novelty because it's meant to attract a crowd, and it's also, I also feel it's meant to rustle some jimmies in a way, because some people hate it when you do that. Like people hated it when Ed Sheeran was in Game of Thrones. People hated it, hated how Peter Dinklage delivered his lines in Destiny.
Yeah.
So, but some people love it as well. So I feel I don't think the point I'm trying to make is it's there to make controversy, but it's to get people talking, and no matter if that's negative or positive, and it's also to just be a novelty. That's how I see it anyway.
Yeah, I almost feel like because we don't know how much he's in the game. We saw him in the trailer, and I'm starting to think, is he just in the trailer? Or if he is in the game, is he just like a side character that you meet along the way and he doesn't actually have any part in the major story?
Considering like he was in the game trailer, um, I feel he'll probably just be a side character, like you say. I can't imagine him being like a main character or something like that. But you never know. Like, yeah, it's interesting.
I hope he's a side character, and I hope he does well in that role. Because at the end of the day, I do want him to be successful in that role. Because he's a nice guy, Keanu Reeves, and he's a good actor when he wants to be. Um, so I think it's a gimmick that he's in the game. But if they've used him correctly, then it'll work. Whereas if they've just like had the idea of, oh, let's put Keanu Reeves in our game, he's popular at the moment, that will fail. Because in 2-3 years' time, his popularity might not be as high, and your sales will plummet. Particularly as the game doesn't release until almost this time next year, so you don't know what's going to happen in those 12 months.
Yeah, because this is kind of relevant in this situation that when you put the video games and putting these famous actors and stuff in them, and then having them come out and try to advertise it, it's how do I put this? It's like it's just an advertising stunt on two different things that don't really mesh.
Yeah.
Because like Keanu Reeves, yeah, he's an actor and he could act in the game, but when he has to come out and advertise it, is he a gamer? And does he really understand what like he's trying to advertise?
From what I know, he is a bit of a gamer, but he's not like hardcore. I know he's not like some random guy they picked off the street though. He does enjoy gaming. Don't quote me at that, but I probably should find a source before I say something. But I'm pretty sure he does like gaming.
I think the same. I think he like, I think personally being in Cyberpunk is like his dream role. He wants to be in a video game, and he wants to be in a big video game. So I think this is a perfect sort of match for him. And yeah, I do think he's a good actor. But one thing I've noticed about him in interviews is he's a lot like us in that,
But yeah,
he's not.
he's
So
like the most down to earth guy, isn't he?
yeah, he's a down to earth guy who isn't the best public speaker. So for him to go on stage at E3, and it was a bit awkward, his pitch, but I think he actually did a good job with it because he just played to the crowd. He knew that they were there for the game, and he knew that he could sell it just by being himself because people love Keanu and people love Cyberpunk. That weird point thing he did at the end when it showed the release date, that was a bit weird. And there was one point where
that's hilarious, man. All the memes.
And
All the
I've
memes
said
from
this a few times, but the bit where he actually said, "So when do you guys want to see when this game's coming out?" And pretty much everyone said yes, except the guy sitting right next to the microphone who went no. So I mean that's not his fault though.
I mean, I've just searched this up, and Keanu Reeves himself said, video games don't need Hollywood stars, and video games and gaming doesn't need legitimizing. So he is pretty much one of us. He's basically saying what we're saying. Video games don't need these Hollywood stars. They can get along on their own merit.
Yeah, and
Yep.
from reading stuff about him, he tends to not accept a role unless he thinks it's right for him. So they must have taken some convincing to get him on board. Either that, or he saw what the game was going to be and thought, hell yeah, I want to be part of this. So if anything, that should make Cyberpunk look even more good. The fact that someone like Keanu Reeves wants to actually be attached to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Now all it needs is Lawrence Fishburne.
Can you imagine? They just remake The Matrix. So yeah, we've also mentioned the fact no Sony this year. I found that a strange decision from them, even if they didn't feel they had anything to announce. Surely there's PS exclusives this year that they could have. It's a bit of a kick in the teeth to those development teams that there's a lot of PS exclusives that are out this year, so why don't they get their own show?
Are they planning to do their own?
We've heard nothing.
They've been very quiet this year.
Because I wouldn't be surprised at this point if, because they're so all for this exclusivity. I can see them just pulling a Blizzard and making their own convention for games.
Yeah, we'll have to see on that one. But I mean, there was so much they could have shown. They could have shown clips from the Last of Us sequel. I'm sure people would have queued around the block just to see that for an hour.
Yeah, but I think what it is like they just have nothing new to show. So nothing to surprise you. Everything has just been announced already.
Well, that kind of leads to my point. Was Microsoft didn't really go nuts this year. I know a lot of people were speculating that if Sony weren't going to be at E3 this year, maybe Microsoft would really push the boat out. But I think they deliberately reined themselves in. And I think it goes back to the last console generation when it was announced, and the fact that Microsoft went first and there was a lot of backlash, and then Sony did their conference, and pretty much half the conference was just poking fun at Microsoft. Whoever won in that argument, I don't think anyone won in that, because it kind of came down to petty, childish, schoolyard kind of banter, and it wasn't particularly enjoyable to watch. And I think Microsoft this year wanted to avoid that. So they just put on a normal show rather than thinking, hey, our rivals aren't here, let's go mental. But even then, the new console should have been Microsoft's sort of focal point for this year. And we don't even know still what it's called. We just know it's called Project Scarlet, but that's not a name for a console. That's the name for the project. Like Kinect was called Project Natal when it was first announced, and then they gave it a name. So we're still at the concept stage. They've said that it's 4 times more powerful than the current Xbox One X, which is incredible if that's true. But besides that, we know it's got a solid state drive, but I couldn't tell you how big that drive is because they never mentioned it. They spent more time interviewing members of the team that were developing it than they did actually showing what it is. So
Yeah,
it's
that
just
that
Go on,
just
Dylan.
tells us it's like it's just not ready to be shown. They haven't worked out the bugs yet, but they need to show as if, oh, we've got this thing in the works and it's gonna be big. If you ask me.
I guarantee the tech for it's already done. They just don't have a design for the body. That's why they didn't show anything.
Yeah, they did that one sort of pan over the circuit
Yeah.
board, and that was the prototype. I'll tell you now, that was the prototype. You could see where they sort of duct taped things together. So they're very much still at the prototype concept stage, which is a little like if they just came out and said that, I'd have been okay. But they tried to dress it up as like this big promotional trailer with no product to actually announce.
To be honest, like I said, I think the tech is actually done. I think if they put it into an Xbox One case, they could probably already send it out. They just don't actually have a design for the case, and because it's the next gen, they need the design. The design is defining. It's got to be defining for the next 10 years. I know they'll probably release a new one every couple of years, like they did with the Xbox One, but
Yeah.
they've really got to get the design of the casing. But I guarantee the tech is already, it's done, it's ready. But obviously they need to go through all their stages of actually designing the case before they can show anything. So it was a little.
So, like, then, in your opinion, when do you think they'll be, announcing a release date for the console?
Well,
Or
my theory is no Sony this year meant Microsoft are being very hush hush because they're waiting to see what Sony do. So I think that's why. I think that's the real reason why we didn't find out what this console was, because every year pretty much Microsoft go first and then Sony try and trump them. So I reckon they're trying to do it the other way around. They're waiting for Sony to blink and then they'll announce theirs. So I think next year, early next year, if not late next year, they'll release it. There was rumours that it will be ready for late this year, which I think is perhaps a stretch considering what we've seen. But I really do think they're waiting to see what Sony do first.
well, yeah, at this point, I don't think Sony has much of a choice. Their hands have kind of been like forced, considering that they're not showing anything. So now they have to show something in order to uh, build up some sort of hype for it.
Yeah, because I think again Microsoft made a statement of we actually do have a console. We're working on something. Whereas Sony, all they've said is we are working on something, but they've not shown anything to do with it. So, are they calling Sony's bluff, perhaps, and saying, we've shown our hand, now it's time for you to show yours?
To answer the question of when it will be released, I guess, I'm thinking 2021. My reasoning for that is that the Xbox One came out in 2013, and Microsoft said that they want their consoles to last around 10 years.
Yeah.
The thing is, 2023 is so far away, and the tech that they have now for the console will be incredibly outdated by then. So I imagine what they're wanting to do is release it not this year, not next year, but 2021, just because it's aesthetic. It's an aesthetic year, it looks nice. You could probably put the year on the console and it would look nice. They might even call it Xbox 2021. I don't know what they would call it, but they could do that because I feel it just looks nice. As I say, I think the tech's already there, and they're not going to be upgrading it much more, so they just need to get the design in. They need to get their live services in, and then they probably, like you say, they probably are waiting a little bit to see what Sony's doing, but I can't imagine them waiting much more than 2 years from now, as, they're essentially anyone who bought an Xbox One in 2013, the lifespan's getting towards the end now. They really can't, with the advancements in new tech and new gaming, it's going to be incredibly hard to rely on the old Xbox Ones. And it feels so weird saying old Xbox Ones because I feel like they've only been out 2 years, but wow, like I say, I think 2021. That's something has to be released then, because it's, I don't know why, but it's it might just be me, but it's almost like a benchmark year. Um, so, or even 2020,
2020 would
that's
be good for the whole gimmick year thing, but I think you're right with 2021.
yeah. Um, on the upside, of course, when Xbox release, Sony will release as well, because the Sony just definitely not. So both Sony and Microsoft don't want a disparity,
Yeah,
despite their rivalry. In fact, because of their rivalry. So the fact that they both released the same year, 2013, means they'll definitely have to release for their next consoles as well.
yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. So yeah, we've talked about Microsoft. We've mentioned a few other conferences. EA, apart from Star Wars, there were no real standout moments. Like I actually missed EA's conference because I forgot which time it was on. So I read some articles about it afterwards, and every article they only had 4 bullet points as to what to look out for. So it really doesn't look like there was that much.
No, EA didn't do it for me, honestly. Because it was just more of the same stuff besides the Star Wars.
I'm actually weighing up right now whether I want to buy FIFA this year or not, and at the moment I'm not really interested because there isn't enough that's changed. Because they spend so much energy and time focusing on Ultimate Team, and they've brought this new Volta game mode in, which it's absolutely nothing about that game mode that interests me. I used to love FIFA Street when it was its own game, but since they've brought it into FIFA proper, it just feels like a tack on rather than an actual game mode. Um, so I think this year I might give FIFA a miss, and I might actually buy Pro Evolution and give that a go. And I'll say that in hushed tones.
I do want to just put a dishonourable mention. Ubisoft.
Yeah,
That was the worst conference in my opinion. The Assassin's Creed Symphony that they did. It was cringy. It was boring. Like it's meant to, it was the Ezio soundtrack and the Connor soundtrack. It was meant to be really hype, but
yeah,
it really wasn't, and it was so out of place. And then we go on to the actual games, and their presentation was all about Rainbow Six Siege and Tom Clancy games. But these are games that were released 3 years ago. And they did, what is it now, the Ubisoft Plus or something like this. It's all just games as service. I don't, like, there was nothing. It was terrible. I don't want to, like, I don't want to flame a company, but man, it sucked. What did they show us? They just showed they want to grab more money off everyone. They just showed that they want to, milk more from their franchises.
yeah. What's the name of the new update on Siege? Operation something. I mean, basically, it didn't warrant its own E3 trailer because we all knew it was happening. It was released pretty much at the time where you don't need a trailer because, we all were expecting it. Months in advance, we knew who the operators were going to be. We just didn't know what they were called.
Phantom Sight.
Phantom Sight, thank you.
Can I just a quick interjection here?
Yeah,
It does not. I don't think this was even a worthy update. It wasn't an update worthy of a name. We got 2 operators.
yeah.
We got 1 slight map rework, and we got bug fixes which didn't fix the bugs. That's it. That's all we got. There was no new content. It was just the 2 operators which we can't even play because we don't have the pass. So, what was the point of this update?
I didn't watch Ubisoft's conference because I just didn't feel like there was anything to announce. I was surprised the next day when I saw about Watch Dogs Legion because it actually looked pretty good. But Square Enix is the only conference that showed gameplay footage from one of their games. They showed a lot of gameplay footage from that game. I'll be honest, I got a little bit bored watching Cloud just fight the same boss for, was it 15 minutes or something they showed it for? But the it kind of brings up the point of, were Square Enix the only developers or the only publishers, sorry, to show gameplay footage because of what happened with Watch Dogs a few years ago? You know, for anyone watching who doesn't know, Watch Dogs was unveiled at E3 in 2014, I think, or 2013, and it looked amazing. And then when the game actually released, a few months later, the graphics had been turned down, and it's happened a few times since. But I've basically called it the Watch Dogs scenario because that was the first one that I was aware of that actually did that. So are companies now hiding gameplay footage so that people don't get overhyped for the graphics quality if it then does need to be tuned down slightly before release?
It's because like people have become wise to how these things work now. So like when games are getting showcased at a conference, people know that it's on PC rather than the consoles. And
That's true.
yeah, there's been quite a few situations where like a game has been released with amazing graphics, but again just gets turned down on release. Like I think what it was Battlefield Hardline or something where that's happened.
Yeah, I think you're right. Actually, I think that was one of them.
That's the last one I particularly remember at the moment.
Spider-Man last year. Um, there was talk that it had happened because they showed footage last year and then it released, and some people said it was something to do with the
The puddles
like,
in it.
yeah, the puddles. But actually, the developers proved that okay, they might have tweaked it a little bit there, and they might have turned the graphics down. But as you explore the map, there are areas where the graphics have been improved from the gameplay trailer. So they actually they did a bit of both. But people were so fixated on is it as good looking as they said in the trailer that they didn't realize that in some cases it was better looking than it was in the trailer. Um,
Yeah.
so I personally think yes, companies are a little afraid now of showing their games, and they're a bit more secretive. There were a couple of other pieces of gameplay throughout the week, but Square Enix was the only one that were sort of willing and excited to show footage from Final Fantasy VII. And I mean, I'll talk a little bit more about the remake in a second because I think it's impressive what they've done, but there are a couple of drawbacks for me. But I mean, Square Enix's conference was an interesting one for me because
Can I just go back to
Yeah.
the Yeah, sorry, I'll just cut in. I just want to, because I want to give two perspectives on this whole Watch Dogs kind of scenario. There's kind of the business perspective, right, where it's a safe bet for companies to just throw out these cinematic trailers, and that's probably what it looks like to the majority of the consumer and the public, where it's like, well, let's not show gameplay because if our gameplay is different or worse to how we release it, it's going to look really bad. No Man's Sky. But from a programmer's perspective, so this is the perspective I kind of have. With the amount of time restrictions these devs are put on, I think the main, and I genuinely believe this, the reason we don't see gameplay is because there is no gameplay at that moment. A lot of these games had a release date of next year. I guarantee most of the game from these gameplay trailers aren't even built yet. There is no gameplay. We saw this for Anthem particularly, where they showed this really cool trailer, and the trailer looks amazing. At that time, there wasn't even a game.
yeah,
There wasn't even models, there wasn't even characters, there wasn't even levels. So, from a programmer's perspective, I don't feel like companies are afraid to show or that they're becoming more secretive. I think it's literally that because they're putting such harsh timelines on their devs, there literally is no gameplay to show at these events. So that's my perspective on it anyway.
no, I mean, in fairness, that is a very good point. I do think in the past, publishers were putting more pressure on developers to get something ready for E3. This year does kind of feel like they weren't as urgent about it. Because yeah, Anthem was the example I was going to use for last year, where they did show a trailer, and it did look awesome, and it really hyped people up. But as you rightly say, now we know there was no game. They didn't even have a name for it still back then. Anthem was their backup name. I think scared probably was the wrong word, but there's less impetus now on trailers or at least gameplay footage. Sorry, trailers still exist, but gameplay footage. There's less urgency behind that, because it is kind of true. Like last year, Bethesda, they showed, was it a 10-second clip announcing Elder Scrolls 6? But no gameplay footage, no hint as to where it was set, just a little zoom out shot, and the whole auditorium went nuts. And that's all it needs these days. Just a little tease to say, hey, we're working on this. Yeah, to go back to what I was going to say with Square Enix, they showed the gameplay from Final Fantasy VII, and to begin with, like Final Fantasy VII is the only Final Fantasy game that I have some history with, and the reason is there was a game. I think I've told some of this story before, but I'll tell it again. My dad used to bring home PlayStation games that, like, he kind of swapped games with some colleagues of his at the time. So every week he'd bring home a game. Me and my brother would watch him play it, or we'd play it ourselves, and then after that week he'd take it back and he'd bring home another game. And one week he brought home this game, and it took me about 11 or 12 years to remember what this game was, because all I remembered is you start on a train and you arrive at a station, and it's kind of like a sci-fi steampunk kind of world, and that is all I could remember about the game. And it was only, I think, 2 or 3 years ago I found out it was Final Fantasy VII. And like my actual memories of it are just those moments, but I do remember watching my dad play this game and just thinking, what is this game? This looks incredible. So I do have a bit of a soft spot for Final Fantasy VII. So to see it announced as being remade, I'm almost tempted to buy it and just experience it myself and see if see if it is my gateway into Final Fantasy, because I don't think I've given it a fair try in the past. But that being said, as I said, I got bored watching the gameplay footage because it was a boss fight, and unless you're playing it, there's nothing really interesting about boss fights to watch. Like, I'd rather if they just collected a montage of gameplay clips from different levels and actually played that instead of just one long level. So I tuned out for a bit. I started doing other things while it was going on, and I looked back at the screen a few minutes later and saw what I thought was more footage of Final Fantasy, and it turned out to be a completely different game that just looked very similar. And then another trailer came on of another completely different game that looked very similar, and it was sort of 4 or 5 games in a row could have easily been a Final Fantasy game but weren't. And that was my disappointment with Square Enix, is they showed a lot of gameplay footage and a lot of trailers, and the audience in the room were very, very excited for these games. But to an outsider like me, they all looked the same. And there's nothing about those individual games that makes me think I want this one over this one. For me, they might as well just roll them all into one, and I may or may not buy it.
I feel Square Enix made a very big mistake, almost rookie mistake, in that they didn't break genres down. What I mean by this is that they showed, I can't remember the order, but yeah, they showed Final Fantasy, and then they went on to show 3 or 4 other JRPGs.
Yeah.
There was no break in between. There was no, indie game in between each one of a different genre. So, rightly, like you say, you're not someone who's a particularly big fan of Final Fantasy. So for you, it was very hard to almost keep track of when a game ended and when another JRPG began, etc.
Yeah.
So I feel that was a really big mistake, and it was also a big mistake just showing a boss fight. The Witcher 3 did something really cool at E3 when it was announced. They did kind of where the character's walking and the background kind of changes around them in different biomes. And
Oh
stuff
yeah,
like that,
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was really good.
That's a really good way of doing it. So I actually feel we shouldn't judge the game, but it was more that Square Enix didn't quite know how to connect with the audience, and they just kind of said, okay, we'll show them gameplay, but we'll just show a boss fight,
Yeah, my other problem with Square Enix is they do have a vast variety of genres that they make. There was no Hitman references. There was no Just Cause references, apart from, I think there's one little sentence at the end. It's like, oh, by the way, Just Cause is getting an update, and that was it. End of conference. No Tomb Raider mention. And as you say, it was all just JRPGs. And I don't have a problem with that, because they clearly knew their audience, but again, I felt like they were playing too much to the existing crowd, and they weren't really focusing on bringing new people in. All right, yeah, I think that was a good discussion. I will say to the audience, we sound negative. I get that, but I was expecting E3 to be better than last year's, and I just feel like it was kind of half of what last year's was in terms of excitement and in terms of quality. And I think it's disappointment more than anything. I'm not angry with anyone in particular or anything like that. I'm not really that kind of person, but I feel like they could have offered more and they held back.
I mean, we were talking before the Microsoft conference, and we like all of us watched the Microsoft one, and we were all so excited.
Yeah.
We were like, yes, okay, Sony's not here. This is going to be the year Microsoft blow us away. They're going to show us so much. And then we watch it, and they're talking about games that were released 5 years ago. Halo, oh, there's Halo. Oh, is this the new console? Oh, here we go, guys. Oh, wait, no. And it was just kind of yeah, it was disappointment. Like, I'm not angry about it. It's just we expected more, and it's almost a thing in the gaming industry now. You really shouldn't expect anything because it just seems to be more disappointment, unfortunately.
Yeah. And
Oh boy,
again,
though.
in
That was one, Mark.
I was just say again, in the interest of fairness, on reflection, there was some good stuff announced. There is some good, like if you scratch the surface, Cyberpunk still looks like a really, really good game, gimmick or not. With Keanu Reeves, it's still a very good game. I do think it echoes Deus Ex perhaps a little too much, but the fact that it's CD Projekt Red developing it, you know, they absolutely knocked it out of the park with The Witcher 3. And if Cyberpunk is anything like that, it's going to be a really, really good game. So there's a few hidden gems amongst the masses if you look hard enough. But overall,
There was a lot of good stuff. I mean, Pokemon Sword and Shield, you know, that had
yeah,
there was some really good release.
Breath
what
of the
else
Wild
was
2,
there? Breath of the Wild 2.
that was a big announcement. That kind of
Thanks.
slipped under the radar, that one.
Yeah.
You guys are stealing my thunder.
Sorry, Dylan.
I was just about to like fully interject and snipe the Nintendo conference into the conversation. And I
Go on
think-
then, because you watched it and I didn't. So what kind of things did you get from the Nintendo conference?
I'll quickly say this was my favourite one.
Yeah,
So,
Nintendo, in my opinion, was the best of the of E3 this year. Same as last year, honestly, as well. It wasn't so much quantity, but the quality they were producing this year. They knew what the fans wanted. They got games like Luigi's Mansion 3, Animal Crossing, Breath of the Wild 2. Nobody expected that.
No, that
But-
caught me off guard, definitely.
Plus some also Smash Brothers expansions. Yeah, they were just delivered what the fans wanted.
Sword and Shield is set in the like a fictional UK, isn't it?
Somewhat.
It's inspired.
Yeah,
I think's
yeah.
the way to put it. Yeah.
So I mean, Watch Dogs and Pokemon both being inspired by the UK. That alone makes me happy because I've always wanted GTA to go back to London, and they haven't done it yet. So the fact that there are other games now that are starting to do it, Watch Dogs is probably the closest I'll get to GTA right now.
That's
Soon.
something I completely forgot. Like, Watch Dogs was in like the UK. Like, you could drive around in a London taxi and hack a payphone.
Oh,
Sorry,
yeah.
Dylan. Go
I'm
on.
just saying, you all forget Assassin's Creed Syndicate was also in the UK.
Yeah, and Assassin's Creed Syndicate was a bloody good game, despite what some people say. I've really enjoyed playing that game.
I'm not even saying this, but I'll make a prediction. Bully 2, that would be in the UK.
Please. Oh,
Could
that
you-
would be so good
Could you
in
imagine
the
them
UK.
UK schoolers
Oh.
with Bully?
Oh, that would be amazing.
I won't say what I was going to say because it's not very family friendly. Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it. More game developers, make your games set in the UK. That's all we ask. And with that, we'll end it there. So a big thanks to my guests, to Ben and to Dylan.
Cheers.
It's been good.
Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. Feel free to leave your opinions down below with E3, whether you were excited with the games that were announced, whether you were sort of underwhelmed as much as we were, or if you were somewhere in between. Feel free to let us know down below. We are always willing to start a discussion on things like that. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Head over to the XVI podcast playlist and catch up on the previous episodes. And if you like what you've seen, be sure to hit the subscribe button and click the bell notification so you never miss an upload. Thank you once again for watching, and until next time, take care. Hey guys, it's Mark here again. Just very quickly to let you know that this is the last episode of the XVI podcast for this 5-week batch. So next week there'll be no podcast. We'll be back though in 2 weeks' time with a brand new podcast. Hopefully getting some of the other guys like Keith and Alex involved once again. Also, this is the last podcast that's going to be video game centric. So 2 weeks' time we might talk a little bit about video games, but it's mostly going to be talking about just anything in general, really. So thanks very much for watching. Once again, don't forget to subscribe and all that good stuff. And until next time, take care.